Okay, sorry about that. It didn't come up right away. All right, so this is the second phase of the French Revolution, and this will be what we finish with before we get to the Christmas break. And this will pretty much be all about the third estate. So, as a quick review, the first estate is the clergy or the church. The second estate is the nobles, the people who are wealthy, have titles. And the third estate is everyone else. And I mean, that could be doctors and lawyers and um, skilled workers and people who have fairly good amounts of money. And then people who are just very, very poor, your peasants, your servants, your farmers. And so it was a very, very wide range of people between the third estate. Either you were very wealthy or you had nothing. And so this is all going to be about the third estate and how it wound itself up. Okay. So this is your vocabulary. So we've already had that. So we'll skip over that. So the third estate has they have the National Assembly. And then they also were going to create a legislative assembly. And this is all the third estate members of the middle class. Okay, so this is the bourgeoisie. So they are at the tennis court oath and they are determined to create a constitution. They're not going to leave until they create a constitution. And so, again, this is loosely based on the American democracy and the American Declaration of Independence. And so, what we're going to start seeing is based upon the Bastille being torn down, is that revolts are going to start breaking out all over France, making citizens panic and fear for their lives. But it's these rebellions that's going to help keep the National Assembly, the Third Estate National Assembly, in power. And then later on, the Third Estate itself in power. Okay, so the Third Estate National Assembly will write a document called the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen. And it's approved in 1789, and it's based loosely on the Declaration of Independence, and it does have the rights of the Enlightenment ideas in there. And so it gives basic rights to individuals such as liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Now, reflecting the rights of the Enlightenment, it proclaims freedom and equal rights for all men. It ends an exemption to taxes. We'll see if it really does. It gives the right for all citizens to make laws. Again, we'll see if it really does. Freedom of speech and press, that for the most part, that does that. And while women are not specifically mentioned, they are assumed to be included. And the reason we say that is because specifically when Napoleon comes into power, he specifically takes women's rights away. So this is why we're assuming that women are included in this. Okay. So while Louis is still in power, technically, his control is limited due to the National Assembly and the Legislative Assembly, which makes the laws. And so remember, we're part of the Third Estate, and the National Assembly and the Legislative Assembly are both made up of the middle class of the Third Estate. Now, let's think about this. The First Estate does not pay any taxes, and the Second Estate does not pay any taxes. So it's up to the Third Estate to pay taxes. Well, okay, but see, not everybody in the Third Estate is paying taxes because you got peasants and you've got the very, very poor and the farmers who cannot pay their share of the taxes. So you're going to have a discrepancy where the middle class is having to pay not only their taxes and not only the taxes for the First Estate and the Second Estate, but they're having to also pay the taxes for those in the Third Estate who can't pay. So when they're making the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, they're making laws that are not going to be fair to everyone. And they're not going to be fair to the poor of the Third Estate. Now, in their minds, it's very fair because they're the ones in charge and they're the ones making the laws. And they're like, we've been paying the bulk of everything for so long, so we're going to make the rules. And all along, the third estate members that are, the poor, the peasants, they're like, well, we are assuming that you are going to back us. We're all in this together. But that's not going to be the case. The biggest point of contention at this point is going to be voting laws. The new voting rules in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen only gives voting rights to those men who, no women, but to men who could pay a certain amount in taxes and who are over the age of 25. Now, the age is not really a problem. Like, everyone is okay with the age, it's the taxes. We've already had a situation where the poor can't pay a certain amount in taxes, which is why we're here in the first place. So now they're being left out again, because if they can't vote, they can't vote on laws. So this is going to be a huge problem because it's leaving out a huge section of the third estate. And here's the thing: whether or not we know for a fact, I can't tell you whether or not. I'm trying to see if there's another. Okay. Whether or not this is going to be wholly accurate, I can't say. It's not going to be 100% accurate. But let's say that this is your third estate. Let's say that that's the middle class. Okay, this is your bourgeoisie. Well, everything else is the peasants. Okay, those are your poor. So we're leaving out a huge chunk of people that are not going to get voting rights. They're not going to have a say in the government. As far as the middle class is concerned, they're okay with that because they're the ones that have been paying taxes for the first estate and the second estate and these poor people too. But the poor is like, yeah, no, that's not fair. And we're not going to be a part of this anymore. So this is leaving out a huge section of the third estate. And, the third estate says we have absolutely nothing to lose. Okay. See if they can get this off of here now. Oops. Well, sorry. See if I can go into this real quick and pause it maybe. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. All right. That took way too long. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's where the problems are going to escalate. And again, that took way too long. I apologize for that. All right. So a new class, a new group will form out of the poor class of the third estate. So we're talking about the peasant section. And they're going to call themselves the Paris Commune. And all they're really asking for is for voting rights, universal male suffrage. If you ever see the term suffrage, women's suffrage or male suffrage, that just means voting rights. And they're not asking for anything major. They just want voting rights. They want universal voting rights. They don't even care about the age. They just want to be able to vote regardless of money, ownership of land, or taxes. So the National Assembly says no. Nope, not going to have it. Can't do it. So out of the Paris Commune, a radical group forms called the Sans Culottes. Now that literally means without pants, but it will translate to, it's going to translate to ordinary patriots without fine clothes. And this pushes the revolution into the hands of all the members of the third estate, not just the middle class. Now, what this will translate to, ordinary patriots without fine clothes or ordinary citizens without fine clothes, this is, I have a voice. My voice counts. I may not dress fancy. I may not live in a fancy house. I may not be wealthy, but I still matter. My voice still counts, and you will hear my voice. And here's the thing. This group of people, they have nothing to lose. They have absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. They're a bigger population, and they have something to say. And, and if the third estate middle class had just thought about this, like they were in this together, they needed to be in this together, they could have, in the end, solved a lot of suffering, but they didn't. Okay. All right. So this is where it's going to take a bloody turn. All right. So Louis is still at Versailles, and he is refusing to accept the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. He's like, I'm not going to accept that. That's just a piece of paper. So thousands of Parisian women have been in Paris, and, they are just through. They're trying to find food for their families. Their kids are starving. They're hearing about parties that have been going on at Versailles, all the while that they've been meeting at the tennis court, at various things that are happening within Paris while they're starving. There's been party after party at Versailles, and they've had it. So thousands of women armed with broomsticks, pitchforks, swords, pistols, and muskets marched to Versailles. They corner Louis. Oh, and like this takes several days. It takes a few days to do all this. But they finally meet with Louis, and they tell him that their children are starving. Well, in the process, they also kill a few guards. They kill some nobles, and they put their heads on pikes. They corner Marie in her bedroom, forcing her to escape through the door. You see it right here to the side there. She escapes before she knows what's going on. And after she kind of sees what's going on, she's a lot more sympathetic to their plight and kind of comes in and talks to Louis, and is like, she's appalled by what's been going on because she's kind of not being told what's been going on. They've killed guards and some nobles, putting their heads on pikes. All the while, they're demanding food for their children. But they also say, Louis, you will accept the National Assembly's decrees of the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. You will accept this government. You will accept that you are no longer in power. So they force the royal family to come to Paris to show that they support the Third Estate and the National Assembly and the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Okay, so they're under house arrest. As a goodwill gesture, Louis will also load food into wagons from the palace and take it into Paris. This is largely Marie's doing. She's like, they're hungry. We've got to do something about it. So the royal family will now become prisoners in their apartment in Paris, and loosely house arrest, okay? All right, now, review. We have the Estates General, we have the National Assembly, Tennis Court Oath, Declaration of Rights of Man, Constitution, basically the same thing. Legislative Assembly is a subgroup of the National Assembly and will make the laws. We have the storming of the Bastille. We have the women's right to Versailles. We have the Sans Culottes. And then the Paris Commune, he will take the king hostage. We haven't really talked about that yet, but they'll get there. They insist the National Assembly of the Third Estate create a new constitution and call for a national convention to have a fair representation of all members of the Third Estate and to call for a new constitution. We have a monarchy, National Assembly, Legislative Assembly, sans-culottes, Paris Commune, sans-culottes, again, part of that, National Convention. Okay. So the Paris Commune will force a national convention to try to form a constitution that will be fair to everyone, not just the middle class of the Third Estate. During this portion, the monarchy is abolished, like it's done. Louis is no longer king of record. Now, let me make this really clear. As far as France is concerned, he's no longer king. He is recognized as king in other countries, but not in France. The government that forms is very unstable because no one is exactly sure from day to day who's in charge. And the reason is because we have people who are in charge who never been in charge of a government before. So different political clubs will form, each with their own ideas on how to run the government, but no one really knows what they're doing. So this is going to be a big problem. Under the leadership of George Danton, a group called the Committee of Public Safety will be formed. It establishes the French Republic. It abolishes the monarchy for good. And George will be executed later in the revolution, we'll talk about. Okay, two political groups will form from the Third Estate that will have different views on how to continue to rule France. The first group is called Girondins. They want to keep the king alive because what benefit will kill him? Like, what will benefit for him dying? And La Montagne, which is the mountain, is the more radical of the two, and they will pass a decree to kill Louis to death, obviously. I need to fix that because, I mean, how else will you kill him? But to kill him, behead him. All right, so here's the thing. This is like the peasant section of the Third Estate. And it's the more radical portion of the middle class. There are some middle class people here. Not a lot, but some. Okay? I'll fix that. All right, so on January 22nd of 1793, Louis is beheaded. The execution of the king will create new enemies for the revolution, both for France and in Europe. The execution did nothing to settle the crisis within France. Like it settled nothing. Nothing was like, what did it help? Nothing. Nobody got any food from it. And then disputes continued to happen, which only continued to lead to more fighting within France. There's a picture of Louis being executed. All right, so other countries outside of France tried to come in and reestablish control. So the Committee of Public Safety separated and established themselves as their own government. It was first led by George Danton, and now it's taken over by Maximilien Robespierre. Now, he is bloodthirsty. He begins by arresting people left and right for supporting the king. And again, he's dead, but supporting like the monarchy. Like, we need to bring back the monarchy. We supported the king when he was in power, that kind of thing, okay? Or disagreeing with Robespierre's ideas. So this will set in motion a time and a place called the Reign of Terror. Robespierre will literally take a mobile execution machine, a guillotine. Mobile courts will be set up to prosecute and execute enemies of the government. He will just roll through a town, set up a mobile court, decide whether or not you're guilty, and then execute you right there. From 1793 to 1794, roughly 40,000 people were killed during the Reign of Terror. One of these included Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. Anyone who opposed the sans-culottes, which is who's in charge of the Reign of Terror, were among those killed. Robespierre would take a guillotine through France for executions. When that proved to be too slow, he would kill people by gunfire, bury them in mass graves. He would take them out on barges in the middle of the river and what am I trying to say? Sink it to kill them. He just killed them however he could, the quickest way. So he was bloodthirsty, and he wanted to get any way he could, he would get the job done. Now, here's the thing. He was also fighting wars outside of France because other countries were coming in to try to take over because there's not a king, and there's a lot of situations going on where there's a lot of unrest. Obviously, there's a lot of chaos. So he's working to protect France from outside conflicts. So the Committee of Public Safety is also trying to take control of France. This is setting up the idea of nationalism. Nationalism is an idea where you have a group of people who have a common language, a common religion, or something that you're fighting for. Now, we'll see nationalism more, but the nationalism will be set up here because these wars are personal. You're fighting for yourself, not a monarchy. And so for the first time in France, you're not fighting for a monarch, you're fighting for yourself. So this is going to set up the idea of nationalism. But all these countries are trying to come in and take control of France because if we could kill our king, what's to keep these other countries from having revolts and their kings being killed? So Robespierre will become very powerful and become very feared throughout France. One of the things he does is he changes everything in France. He changes the churches. They're no longer called churches. They're called temples of reason. Everyone has to dress in togas like they did during Roman times, and you're called citizen. And he changes the calendars. I mean, he's just bizarre. But the people within the National Convention, which is a government, they're just tired of him, and they start disagreeing with his ideas because he's killing people right and left. And he's like, it's getting to the point where it doesn't matter. You could agree with him the day before, and just because you don't agree with one little thing he says, he's cutting your head off. So they vote to condemn him, and he will be executed with his own guillotine on July 28th of 1794. After his death, more moderate leaders will take control, and the Reign of Terror will end. Now, here's the thing. Doesn't mean that this is the end of the revolution. It still gets crazy. We have a group of people come in to take charge called the Directory. And this is where it really gets fun, because this is where Napoleon just walks in and says, I'm in charge. But that's where we'll get into after Christmas. Okay. So this is confusing, I know. And especially because we're having to really cut down on what we're doing. So between now and probably over the weekend, I'll put together like a little chart and of some sort and try to label a little bit better of who is who and who's doing what, so that we can keep it in context of who's doing what. But just know all of this is third estate people. Okay. If you can keep that in control, that all of this is third estate people, you'll be good to go. All right. If you have any questions, just email me, let me know what's going on, and then we can go from there. All right.